Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this moment's live stream. I want to speak about a very interesting topic, and so I've kind of titled this episode The Attempt of a Civilization to Reach Eternity. This is an interesting concept. It may be a concept for many who may not like to dabble in, may not want to consider, but I'm speaking to those who are interested, you know. And so the idea is to try to kind of visualize and wonder, like sincerely wonder, why would a civilization require to reach eternity or an eternal reality? Why are so many people on this planet concerned about heaven? Why are so many people wondering about the beyond? The reason is because we are trapped in a bubble of knowledge. And what that means is that we are trying to comprehend the totality of existence through certain methods of form, certain formulations, certain. Uh, we're trying to use shapes to realize what's beyond shapes. And a new dimension means new eyes. That's the most important thing. This is why kind of traveling from different dimensions, you can't be the same self in some sense. What that means is in different moments of your life, you've been a different sense of self. And so the attempt of a civilization to reach eternity is kind of like how the individuals in that civilization are being self-aware of, in some sense, the greatest potential of just what this science project, after billions of years of evolution, has kind of, become. So, based on how well you have understood yourself, you will understand others. And based on how well you've understood others, you will understand yourself. This is a general rule. In the word civilization, there is the implication of a certain behavioral model in place. As if in Greek mythology there was the concept that the universe began from chaos and order began, and the first order became the first gods. Our civilization is an effort of a creature to step out of randomity, to step out of meaninglessness. So part of nature's intelligence kind of like found a way to separate itself physically, you know. And after it physically separated itself from the world, it ideologically separated itself. That means the moment it considered a sense of like, this is me, that's the world, that was a sort of subjective realm taking into place, something many people don't consider, a sort of subjective evolution at work, originating through a simultaneous awakening, as if the eyes of your physical body, like your biological body, see a certain amount of range and spectrum of reality, but what I like to call the inner eye, some people call it the third eye, you know. For me, I call it inner because it's not per se an eye. It is more of a sort of kind of instantaneous reception of something, kind of like how Michelangelo, this great Italian sculptor, he's famous for this quote where he says, "I saw the angel in the stone and I set it free." He was a sculptor. This dude made statues. So in some sense, he looked at a piece of rock and saw an angel in it, saw the shape, that advanced shape in a non-advanced shape, you know? And so similarly, the attempt of the civilization will require its necessity for effort in a certain direction. Because we could totally be effortless and we'll be like, let's party it out till the end of days. But, there's something more that can be done. And I am honestly just inspired by this kind of like story. This story is like the most powerful thing, like idea that I feel can help people. It instantly eradicates depression, right? And so the idea is like, I'll tell you the story. The story is about this guy who's a philosophy teacher, and he writes in this exam, this question, bonus question at the end, and the question's called just it's like the word why, WHY, and then question mark. And so, many students write many different answers, but the next time the teacher sees them, um, the teacher looks at the class and calls upon a name of a kid, and he says, "Stand up," and that kid stands up in front of the crowd, and the teacher, tells this kid, "You got the right answer. Share your answer, please, with the class." And the kid says the answer to the question why was, "I wrote why not?" question mark. And so all the kids are like, "Wow, we've just learned this." you know but it's like the reason that was the correct answer because it understood the law of opposites. And the law of opposites means if you as an intelligent being have the capacity to create a depressed state, you could simultaneously create a non-depressed state. In every moment of your misery you can at the same time experience glory, but the glory would generally be an opposite pattern of the misery. That means this is not a sort of fragmentation of the psyche. This is in some sense a sort of advanced conscious self-reflection, in that your sense of self functions into a sort of linguistic landscape of meaning through a sort of dualistic principle, as if we cannot know the light without the darkness, and without the darkness, where's the light? And so this is the important, crucial thing, that our reality is based on, there's a sort of mutual dependence of many factors. And so our multidimensionality, if it is natural, this is the most fascinating thing, to try to create a sort of blueprint or library of unknown dimensions of intelligence and experience, which was in some sense a subtle vision of mine. I found it in some sense futile, but playful to do nonetheless. The reason I find it to be futile, because the unknown is like the reason we're going beyond the clouds is because we want to see something more. And that seeing something more is being powered by an energy of self-reflection, as if in some sense, like an infinity circle, your mind kind of functions in a way where, how can I tell you, it's like, oh, you're always at the center, you know so in the behavior of the shift of a society, and kind of being like, okay, we're all live once, let's try to do the most efficient, intelligent thing, that is collectively conscious, not just individualistically greedy, we will find ways. I find that what's going to happen is that the realities that don't work, and who are not even trying to contribute to the civilization succeeding, this is going to sound insane what I'm going to say, but are going to, based on a universal karma, not exist. And what that means is the future has always, seen beyond the past. And right now we're being memories for our future self. We're kind of time traveling conceptually all the time. Excuse me. This idea of the philosophy teacher sharing that with the students, the reason it's profound, again, it is to some degree just realizing that the opposite of everything is a possibility to a mind that could consider one side. If you can see one side of the coin, you could probably see the other side. And so this is where I find success, is something where it's like a good state of being. And so human beings, because we have this kind of like urge to survive, we want to be in a good state of being. But because we have kind of, we're social creatures, and there, we have egos in some sense, pretty much attention to subtler form as ourselves, you know? That's the ego. It's kind of like the idea you have of yourself, which is like it's not visible, but somehow you know you're aware of it, you know? We are very intelligent creatures, but we don't often try to uh, have a certain elegance and cadence in our approach to the mystical. You see, beauty is very crucial. Beauty is what brings peace, because when one is in the presence of the most beautiful, they are not aggressive, as if they are instantly made calm. That means, you know, people don't realize that the greatest movement towards freedom is not a violent rebellion where people are trying to shout. I mean, sometimes in history that's been necessary. Like, I'm not trying to critique the French Revolution, but I'm telling you, there are good men and bad men, and then there are those who walk the middle way. And those who walk the middle way are, in some sense, paying attention more to the design, which renders their consciousness from the beginning a neutral witness. And when I say a neutral witness, this is very crucial, because when I ask you, what is your mind? You'll be like, it's what my brain is somehow projecting. I'll be like, okay, like that's a valid answer. But what is your mind, and can it be put into a shape? If I tell you, like, bring your mind in front of me, let me see it, would you be able to do that? And you're going to realize, you're going to say no. Mind is kind of how attention is acknowledging itself in an invisible room, where we consider memory and imagination, but on some raw level, it's just this spontaneous, instantaneous attention that the moment it wakes up, it begins to simulate for itself a story of life. Subjectively, I'm speaking, and this is very important, because we need that story of life to communicate with others, because this is the problem. Young people sometimes are blinded. Like, let me tell you, just like how people look at religion, and they're like, back in the day, like even more primitive, like, let's say pantheistic kind of religions, um, they'll be like, okay, why are these guys worshiping like a wooden, like, idol or something, So there was like idol worship. But nowadays, especially a lot of the youth, they get caught into idea worship, and the reason is because they like the emotion the idea produces for them, but they do not calculate the importance of the waking state. For a yogi, this is why in these Mr. Within talks, I don't like, if you come to me and you're like, Mr. Within, can you tell me, can you can you explain to me or teach me sort of meditation? I will be like, bro, you can't teach the Western mind a sort of attitude that their culture has been behaving the opposite of. You cannot make an atheist like a theist, and you cannot make a theist into atheist. You cannot. It's like there are programs. Like, if the atheism and theism were programs of mind, these people, literally, their program is too deep. They're too deep into the program. They can't even tell that their matrix is false. And that is the problem with a sort of people who have a superior intellect, but they have very low self-awareness, because they kind of lock themselves in a world of their own validity, and because of a lack of need for confrontation due to a sort of inventor's inspiration, there's a lot of geniuses who are locked in their own rooms because they need that bunker. They need that bunker for their genius to come out. And this is very fascinating. Leonardo da Vinci has this quote where he says, to develop a complete mind, study the science of art, study the art of science, learn to see, realize how everything connects to everything else. And this is a quote ascribed to Da Vinci, but I think it does the deed. This quote is sharing something profound, as if, like, because Da Vinci was a guy who his left hand, or with his right hand, I believe it was his left hand he would draw, and with his right hand he would write, or something like that. But he was like a polymath, and there's a special word for those people who can kind of do this. I don't know the technical term, but just the idea was he was very able. Both of his hands could function at like a very advanced state, at a very advanced level, and at the same time they could function. And because they could function at the same time, his mind was probably in some superior mode of function as well. When I say superior, not like superior like in an intellectual academic way, Because let me tell you, I believe children are all born as geniuses, but they forget it. And years later, somebody comes and, tries to wake them up and say, it's not about being a creative person or not, you know, it's about just realizing you're a moment of being. This is life. And you are, in some sense, creating a lot of your relationships with this world based on your experiences. And when you wonder about who you truly are, you, in some sense, go get to the language threshold. This is a concept I designed, you know? As a child, I wanted to be an inventor. And, you know, life kind of took me towards that direction, but at the same time, I was steered differently. As if my boat was headed towards that direction, but the winds pushed me somewhere else, you know? And so I kind of find myself a sort of an inventor of language, as if I looked at the dictionary and I'm like, okay, these are like words being put for, ideas, and they can't cover all ideas, you know? So in some sense, we have to become conscious of language. Any society that treats its language in a sacred way, with a central awareness to silence from the beginning, you don't understand. Words are sacred, and if they're used with the wrong intent, they're called magic, or black magic, or whatever people call it, manipulative magic, let's call it that. I find hypnotism falls into that in a kind of modern way. But anyways, there is a sort of spectrum of influence, and your moment is your center. It is your core, just like the planet has its core, its center of gravity. Your mind's center of gravity is the idea of yourself, and your idea of yourself is honestly just like it's how your experiences are keeping your attention. So in some sense, when a person tries to explore the inner dimensions of existence, within yourself, what happens is you kind of reach a conceptual chaos, and you realize there's some things language can never shape. And then that's kind of, you reach the language threshold, and you have to in some sense become preferenceless to walk into the portal of a higher dimension. You got to kind of like come to a neutrality, a sort of, not like you have no references, because your excitement is a sort of new exploration. An explorer has already been detached from the past in order to continue into the future. Do you see? Like for me, we gotta let me tell you what a stupid sacrifice is. A stupid sacrifice is someone jumping in front of a bus to save somebody else, but at the same time being fatal. Like it was in a certain movie I saw this. The movie was a comedy, but it was like, I felt like the concept was okay. It was kind of good, but at the same time, it made the idea of physically sacrificing your life for the life of another person because of an emotion, like the crucial element. And for me, it's not that we should just detach from emotion. For me, it's like you can't analyze uh, just from like the known aspects of a system, the unknown aspects of a system. The unknown is in some sense being received through, it's being given meaning based on the opposite, based on the knowledge. What is knowledge? It is symbols that have advanced into complex levels and dimensions through contributions of the stories of the lives of human beings who have taken society and civilization serious enough to contribute to it, to live not just for a person, to live for your world, to advance it, to realize it, like, what's the point of it? Like for me, I have this mentality, and it's not perhaps the best mentality. I don't, listen to me with your own discretion, but like, I'm not recommending this, but I have this feeling sometimes that like there might come a point where, just like how I have been okay in the past to go into states of just stillness and silence for just complete hours until a point where time is no longer relevant, and I'm kind of like being this intuitive remembrance of already knowing how that meditative state and that silence is a sort of unspeakable samadhi, because the mind is quiet. And when the mind is quiet, miracles happen, because the mind is not rejecting itself through a sort of insecure acceptance of an idea of itself. So what I mean by that is that you are not the idea you have of yourself, because you're pretty much like this attention, right? This attention, the spotlight of attention, where different forms are moving in, as if in one manner you're a transparent orb, kind of moving through different surfaces and taking the qualities. So in some sense, my nature of being has been different in different situations. There's moments I'm not proud of, moments where I've been angry, violent, where I wanted to take the route of that kind of warlord conqueror, trying to be like as if I felt the world had hit me too hard. So I was like, I'm going to not destroy the world, but in some sense not care for its future. That's a sort of destruction, not caring for the future. So I kind of became a sort of there. I went. This was very like, what is this, like 8 years ago or something? Like this is a while back, right? Yeah, this is probably like 8, 9 years ago, right? I was very young, and I wasn't as, I didn't have the sort of sophisticated ideological architecture I have now, you know? It's as if like at that time I wanted to be an idea, like, I like something in the world didn't happen as I kind of saw it in my mind, and I would get angry. And it was such a spoiled, ridiculous, stupid attitude. I don't know where I picked it up as a kind of attributeless consciousness at some point. It's like, because life is a sort of self-updating mechanism. We cannot avoid it. Just like how the body grows, the mind advances its world. For me, this is honestly the situation, because this talk is honestly very bold, the title. Because I'm one being among 8 billion beings, and so why should these ideas matter? Well, let me tell you, if the concept is unbelievable, let us begin with the context, and maybe the context will, in some sense, become of real value. Let me tell you like this, guys. You see, I can right now multiply, divide, and do anything to the idea of myself. I can tell you right now I exist. I can tell you right now I don't exist. I can tell you I have a past self. I can tell you I have a future self. I can tell you I am only the present moment. I can tell you I am in some sort of, you know, like, extraterrestrial, inverted triangular kind of like, huge stone prison in space, Like I could say that, I could say anything. I could, from silence, try to project any sort of meaning on this. But what I have realized is that regardless of what man does, nature moves. Nature waits for no ego. If when you understand this, you free yourself from unnecessary expectation that creates anxiety, because it creates a sort of too big of a life that you can't get as early. When you want something, like this is why patience is kind of like a sort of medicine for anxiety for the mind. Patience, and the ultimate remedy is gratefulness. Gratefulness is the DMT for like your ego. The stage of human social development and organization which is considered most advanced. So the example here, it says the Victorians equated the railways with progress in civilization. And then, the second category of it is the process by which a society or place reaches an advanced stage of social development and organization. The next definition of it is the society, culture, and way of life of a particular area. And the example is the great books of Western civilization, the early civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. And then the next definition, the last definition of it, is the comfort and convenience of modern life, regarded as available only in towns and cities. The example is in the UK, nowhere is very far from civilization. You know, these are very interesting definitions, but I see that a common thing is like this definition is very interesting. It says the process by which a society or place reaches at an advanced stage of social development and organization. So you see, we got to develop new social systems and new methods of organization. And what that means is we have to push ourselves in this cruel, let's say, social system to, in some sense, start some sort of renaissance. And media gives us that ability. Media plus freedom means a sort of global community evolving. Because let me tell you, we don't have time for racism. We don't have time to be racist as a species. We don't have time to focus on the faults of others that we only see. You see, we don't have time to be ignorant because we are literally the only living beings in this universal sector as we see it. This planet, this rock seems to have moving stuff on it, you know? We are that moving stuff. And we're all like dressed up, sitting at our tables on our computers, drinking coffee, you know, feeling like kingdoms of our own kind of views and beliefs, you know, feeling like the king of the kingdoms of our, which represent our beliefs, you know. We're gonna see at some point we cannot avoid change. And so what inspired me from the Buddha's life was that he saw suffering, and that means he saw mortality. And he realized no man can escape death, as if regardless of whatever sort of belief system you try to subscribe to or hold on to, you know, or get on that boat, you know, before the Titanic falls, you know. The beautiful thing about truth is that in order for the idea to have meaning, there must be a possibility to the concept. Excuse me. Don't speak and smoke, kids. Mr. Within has concluded that we have to start from a sort of self-training of attention, as if a person is able to train the attention of a dog, like let's say a dog owner, you know, a kind dog owner, right? So let's say a person has been able to train the mind of a dog or the mind of a child, let's say many parents, they must also be able to train their own minds then, because they have displayed the skill to someone else. So how would you train yourself? So you would kind of look at the concept of, like there's the Zen saying where it says if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. And oh my God. Okay, so dear listener, I want you to imagine in an extreme like size, let's say 244 font in Microsoft Word. My apologies for the coughs kind of typed. um, uh, I'm trying to kind of like the thing is when I give these talks, I kind of follow a sort of inspiration. The inspiration is the depth of the usefulness I have seen in a certain pattern of thought. When I say pattern, because just like a puzzle, the idea of yourself is composed of your attention, kind of like, linking to many incidences and many imagery. Many moments of your life are defining many other moments of your life. And you realize all these moments of life are accessible and just present in one moment. That means I thought I was traveling. Like I've been to many different countries. I've been blessed with that privilege. And I kind of feel like a part of me hopes that, like, I don't know. I honestly don't know where these Mr. Within talks are going. But a part of me really hopes that one day I could speak to an international audience, to a universal audience, not even an international one. You know, that what that means is like, because I want to speak to human beings, and I have spoken a lot before, so I just want to directly kind of speak, you know. And the most directest thing I can say, act as if the universe is looking out through your eyes, and because the universe is looking at itself, there is absolute mastery. There can be nothing wrong with presence. And so the whole notion of spirituality was very profound, because subconsciously the kind of attack and suggestion it was making to the archetypes of many people was that the idea of, let's say, the greatest man, which was considered the physical man with the most achievements and success, was then kind of like people were wondering, okay, what's greater than that? And they realized it was the contribution of the mind and the words of the person. And then they're like, what's greater than that? Then it was the actions and, the achievements of the person. Then they're like, what's greater than that? And then they realized the most greatest thing is a union with God, you know? And what I mean by that union with God is that means the effect and the cause kind of reuniting as the same moment. That means the source of the universe is remembered. And when you remember the source of the universe, you laugh. The reason you laugh is because you enter a sort of hollowness. Because the kind of viewpoint I'm functioning, dear listener, is that you're not your thoughts, and you're not your emotions, and you are not what you can observe, because that implies that there's a deeper observer. There's an observer within, you know. So it's very fascinating, because spirituality has, don't some people say this and I kind of agree with it, I guess. Like, no, I agree with it, but I also feel it shouldn't devalue that concept too much. But the idea is that uh, the language that explains spirituality can become perverted if unnecessarily too much is requested from the disciple. So this is what many great teachers, in some sense, an ancient way of speaking about it is like many great teachers get bit by the snake, is that they let their ego move them rather than their pure awareness as their moment. There's a sort of thing called pure awareness. It's pretty much like the absolute mastery of your intelligence within. When I say this absolute mastery of your intelligence within, that means you kind of look at the world, like the physical world. Imagine you're just in a park looking at life and trees and seeing buildings in the back, and just there. You suddenly see that everything that you have a word for, that word is being kept there. It is being kept there by attention. Concentration has, by many great leaders, been said to be the secret of success. Because concentration was where hope and effortless, kind of incredible effort comes from. A sort of kind of sniper focus and your attention on just the reality that you want to happen. And I have this viewpoint. You know, if a lot of people speak, like think of it this way, if we have this kind of, like, you know, the internet kind of provides this in some way, but if it kind of advances and we have this very simple global community where people, every human being has a podcast for themselves and they're sharing their ideas, you know, I kind of very poetically, in something I wrote a long time ago, called it the great work. The great work of the being is their greatest contribution. Their greatest contribution is their greatest self-awareness and greatest awareness. And their greatest awareness is a sort of resolution of a non-dual, universally, collectively kept presence that is not bound by personality. So you kind of relax into realizing you've always been a soul, but this soul has nothing to do with the world of material form. So you relax. You realize you can't go to heaven, you can't go to hell, you can't go to purgatory. You can't go to any concept. You realize this is your moment. This moment is it doesn't belong to anyone because you're just an energetic presence of attention in a sort of, organic, bag and packet of energy, which is this physical body. So this is a very interesting notion. That if we had a global society where human beings were sharing their minds, we would suddenly have so many ideas kind of being put into this kind of river system, where the thoughts of many human beings begin finding parallels to one another. And so we begin having great ideas move to the top. So this is what Mr. Within is saying, you know, I will say it out there, and if somebody wants to kind of in the future financially compensate me for giving the idea, you're totally welcome. But this idea is too important for me to keep to myself, especially in this moment. And the idea is that somebody creates a sort of YouTube, very proper sort of website, where just like how people easily make YouTube channels, they make podcast channels, and kind of, and these podcast channels are, it's more like an Instagram kind of vibe, you know, where people can search through different people, and instead of looking at people's just physical bodies, they're for the first time getting access to their mind, which means in some sense their word. And so people would at first say, what's the point? Why would a person need to kind of like create a sort of vocal journal for themselves? You know? And I'll tell you why. Because the thoughts that you get every day just come to you once in that way on that day. That's why. That's why I give these talks, because I know that the views I have today is very unique, and tomorrow I'm gonna have a different view and look back at this and be like, oh my God, that's how I was yesterday. And at the same time realize the sophistication and the viewpoint, because that's the beautiful thing of kind of like, a playful kind of, you know, uh, master of presence, because the master of presence has in some sense unlocked a supreme realization that between the individual activity of existence and the cosmic activity of existence, there is an inseparability. The veil is cut the moment you're no longer defined by thought and emotions, which in some sense dwell in a sort of dualistic territory. You have to ask yourself, okay, I saw the most evilest thing, I saw the most beautiful, divinest thing, and now who is it that is seeing both of these at the same time? And you realize the power of your moment is novelty, and novelty is a divine entrance of the unknown in the mind of man. What that means is a new idea is like as valuable as a new child being born, because its contribution is a sort of design that has to find its place. So what I find right now is the first thing human beings have to do in order for their civilization to be able to have more of a potential to attain an eternal vision, an eternal effort to a sort of eternal continuity of our species' greatest inspiration. We have to kind of be very playful because this is a chaotic universe. For God's sakes, we're all on a giant rock in the middle of just empty space, you know, and there's the sun, just chilling right there. And if these solar flares keep expanding to a certain point, the Earth can become too dry of a desert-like death zone. At the same time, the Earth is in a certain orbit where we're not all freezing, but weather conditions and all this global crisis that people talk about environmentally, you know, there could be issues with, way ecosystems are. But the whole thing is that we want our children's children to have a better journey in this material realm. And when we make that important, we realize that first we must, in some sense, socially enlighten every human being that it is okay for them to be who they are, but they have to also have this ability where Aristotle says it is the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting this. Aristotle was a kind of one of those lords of rhetoric. He was a lord of speech. He understood language because he realized he was not a thought, he was not a word, he was not a concept. He was the value giver, and the value giver is as if like Thor can never be his hammer, but his hammer moves with his will. And in some sense, a person can never be the universe, but it moves with the will of the universe. With I said this in some of my early talks. Uh, this is one of those things I think a lot of comedians are going to quote me for. If the Earth decides to move the other way, we all have to feel it. If suddenly chaos enters my life, if I suddenly reach the point where it is my last breath, I will at least know that there is the presence of the Watcher within. The Watcher within, once it has realized it cannot die because only an idea dies, only what is born can die. Do you understand what I'm saying? So when you realize that there's something that's being you, like just listen to what I'm saying, dear listener. You are matter. You're a bunch of sophisticated, complex, you know, designs and interlinking of atoms and energy, you know. You're just a bunch of particles in a sophisticated manner, but there is something that is aware that you are this. And because it is aware that you are a body, it is not a body. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the mystery of the inner realms. And the mystery of the inner realms, honestly, it can only, the entrance to the mystical is only through sincerity. And sincerity means you're not going to a, toy shop, to just buy a new idea or a belief. I find a lot of Westerners who go to India, they're kind of like, philosophy shopping. And it's a bit rude and at the same time, like a bit careless. Because you have to understand, wisdom means a sort of an acceptance of what is naturally true for you. And when you wonder what is naturally true for you, it is how you're being. And how you're being doesn't have to do anything with what you're doing. Do you see what I mean? It's just naturally there prior to your thoughts and beliefs, and you, even as a child learning language, you were just being here as an attention. And that pure attention is attributeless. And when I looked in this religious text when I was young, the God that it was spoken about in religion is an attributeless God because it is within all that is, and because it is watching all that is. And so this blew my mind because it's as if like it's as if like that was the clue, that was the mystical clue. As a kid, I kind of like puzzles. I like kind of managed to solve the Rubik's cube, and like until two pieces were left, and then realized, oh my God, people use algorithms. But the whole idea is that the core self is a presence, which means it cannot have a personality and it does not exist in ideas of time and space. So it's just you're there. And if you experience this, you suddenly tap into a sort of remembrance of how, if you are comfortable moving, you're also comfortable being still and silent. And for some people, this what I say might sound a bit savage and chaotic, but on some manner, it is actually nothing compared to a sort of true life of a mystic, because the life of a mystic has to do with a sort of devotion, a divine devotion for the hidden to become unhidden, for God's mysteries to be unraveled, and for truth to arrive, for the end to become a new beginning, and for the new beginning to never end. Dear listeners, we are living in many simulations of language. The reason I say we're in a language war is because you should be at war with language. You should look at your beliefs, write them down, and look at that piece of paper and be like, should I rip this and find and just look at the world anew and just have new beliefs? Or what should I do? How should I live? A lot of people give themselves physical freedom. You know what I mean? Like there's people who do parkour in the streets, but how much do people give their minds freedom? The idea of their self, a sort of ability. How many people wake up in the morning and they are like, if I am alive once today and I can only live this day once, why should I not have this mentality that my greatest self is ever presently here? Why am I being denied the eternal when the temporal leads to nothingness? And there comes this inner urge, kind of like a lion that's been told it's a sheep its whole life, realizing it's a lion and being like, oh my God, I can roar. Ah! you know? And there's this also very profound kind of military saying, ancient saying, where it was like, you know, you can have an army of lions, but if they are led by a sheep, those lions are denied their greatness. And it's also said you can have an army of sheep and you can have their leader be a lion, and you can see those sheep not become lions but no longer just be sheeps. They're moving beyond themselves. That is greatness. Greatness is it's boring if it's just individual. This is why people said don't seek fame, because it's hollow. Because like how much can you idolize yourself? It gets boring. Self-praise gets boring. I stopped showing off probably like at the age of 12. Just I was like, I see things, but I don't show it off. I speak sometimes because kind of I get intuitive commands from my moment that I should be doing this. Kind of an intuitive, instantaneous knowing. Kind of like how your phone suddenly rings, suddenly an idea pops into my attention, into my subtler realms of abstraction and imagination. There's two ways perhaps one can say a civilization can reach the eternal. One manner is that the civilization tries to create technologies with an infinite ability to try to create the eternal. The other manner is for the civilization to remember that it is already eternal. And if it chooses not to remember it is eternal, then it is just okay to live its whole life in an empty room. It's totally fine. Live a life where you just think you're atoms all day. It's totally cool. But what is more beyond that is a sort of kind of uniqueness of how our intelligence is here. And it doesn't matter if you got to fight beliefs. This is what I don't like about some atheists. The atheists that deny the unknown are fools. And the theists that deny the known are fools. And the spiritualists that forget the ever presence of consciousness, you have to reincarnate because life wouldn't make sense to you. Jesus Christ, why don't they say this to Buddhist people? To think, to put the design there in the first place is a sin. But it is not a bad sin if the design has a sort of kind of like metamorphosis, kind of lead turning into gold, alchemical transformation quality about it. You're a member of the species. I say this to my closest friends. I say, you got to find the vision of the species, the love of the species. What that means is you got to kind of look at people and no longer have hate. Hate is useless. It's inefficient. Anger is useless. It is inefficient. Sometimes you might have to momentarily utilize these energy levels, but at the same time, you got to be conscious. You got to be conscious of who you are. And the most immediate way for you to become conscious, to find a sort of union of mind and body, is to just sit still somewhere and just listen to your breathing. There's see, like I should be doing that too. There's no meditation, there's no practice, there's no kind of heaven we're trying to get to or nirvana we're going to get to. Forget about the concept of enlightenment. Whenever you hear the word enlightenment, think it's just asking you where's the light in your eyes. That's pretty much it. It's like, how is light in your eyes being existence? That's the enlightenment question. For me, when I'm speaking into advanced communicators. I'm not here to try to enlighten people. I feel that's like your own responsibility, because nobody can enlighten you when you that you see, only you can see. You see what I mean? It has to, like, this is why I say it has to be the purpose of the outer guru is to be a mirror. If somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh my God, Mr. Within, I listened to your talk, and then I thought that in this whole life I've just been paying attention to trying to be something better, not realizing I've never just stopped and kind of look at who I am and be like, oh my God, I have my own views, I have my own eyes, I have my own vision, I have my own view," you know? And so this kind of back and forth of perception from an individual mold of a temporal nihilism, we're kind of looking towards the horizons of a sort of eternal advancement. Because human beings, we live for games. We create games, like this is why people love sports, and I will always inspire sports, someone I had a conversation with someone, they were like, it's crazy. They were like, sports is a mass kind of illusion, so people don't pay attention to the real world. And I was like, that is not true. Sports is the real world in a world that's very quickly becoming digital and becoming, in some sense, unhealthy, because it's not becoming conscious of its personal life, because the personal life, which is a sort of social, working, hustling life, occupies a lot of the attention of the being. So this is why life is something where you've been training for it since the beginning of your existence. You are a storehouse of your own wisdom, of how your experiences have accumulated into unique ways of knowing things. No human being is stupid, because, like, you know let's say, like, a person looks at their dog and they're like, you know hey dog, you're pretty stupid, you're not as smart as human beings. And let's say, some happens that kind of sentence is recorded in the DNA of the dog that's passed many generations, and suddenly in the future dog owners have go buy this technology that kind of connects to the dog, and then the dog can just speak to the owner, and suddenly, like, even though it's not the same dog and it's like many generations, but the DNA is there, let's say playfully with the story to make sense. you know the dog, suddenly there's this owner that looks at its dog, and suddenly the dog looks at the owner and says, hey man, don't talk rude, like, your ancestry, you know a part of me remembers. I should have honestly I'll give you a better story, this Indian story that kind of resembles this. This is the playful phase of the talk, by the way. There's a man in India, he's selling these cylindrical kind of looking hats on a cart, and he's moving around the streets and he manages to sell a few, but he has a bunch, and he goes sits by a tree for lunch. you know and as he sits there, he eats his lunch, he's by the river looking at that, like, and somebody, he looks at his cart and he's like, nice, I got a lot of hats, I could still, make some, you know um cash, some fast cash. And so this man, after lunch, he's just looking at the river, and it's so peaceful, and the way he position, he's like kind of laying aside to the tree is very relaxing, and so the man falls asleep. And in a sense, like in like 20 minutes or something, he suddenly wakes up and he kind of looks and he's like, oh my God, okay, I fell asleep, with my cart just being there, you know. And he kind of like gets up, and he looks at his cart and he sees all the hats are missing. And he looks under the cart, around the cart, and he gets shocked. Suddenly he hears like this kind of screeching noise, and he looks up and he's like, oh my fucking God. Like, he looks up and he sees there's like 12 monkeys. There's a lot of monkeys, and they're all wearing the hats that were on the cart, right? And the monkeys are just laughing, you know? And so what happens is that the guy looks at the monkeys and he raises his hand in a fist because he doesn't know what else to do, and he's like, "Monkeys, give me my hats back!" Like he shouts something, you know. And the monkeys, instead of giving his hats back, they just all raise their fists like mimic him, right? And the guy gets so angry and he shouts and he does all these hand movements, and these monkeys are taunting him by doing exactly what he does, you know. And what happens is, the guy just gets frustrated. He takes off his hat and throws his hat on the ground. In that moment, like, suddenly all the monkeys take off their hat and throw the hats on the ground. And there's this awkward, silent kind of Matrix-like moment where this kind of like hat seller, hat salesman is just like looking at the tree with all these monkeys, you know. And what he does is, like, in an instant, somehow, with some kind of like, martial artist equivalent kind of rhythmic ability, he just picks up all the hats before the monkeys can get to him, and he realizes he has like this bag beside his crate, and he suddenly puts all the hats in the bag, you know and he suddenly moves his crate and he goes out of there, right? And he goes home and he tells the story to his son, and his son tells it to his grandson, and many generations go by and the story goes, you know, and eventually, like the next generation, let's not make it too many generations. Let's say, like, the guy goes and tells the story to his son, and the son says it to his grandson, and his grandson is still selling hats. He's in the same situation as his grandpa. And so he goes there, and he finds himself again very coincidentally, in the same kind of like place his grandpa was, by the same tree, and he sits there, and he has the cart there, and coincidentally he's also like eating lunch, and he falls asleep and wakes up, and he suddenly looks up and he sees, oh my God, all the hats are missing, and he looks at all the monkeys all wearing the hats, taunting him. And so he suddenly remembers his grandpa's story, and he's like, he just takes his hat slowly from his head, you know, and he sees like the monkeys kind of like just staring at him quietly, and he throws his hat on the ground. Or let me say it like this: he just takes off his hat and instantly throws it on the ground, like what's grandpa, kind of son, right? Then suddenly something like unbelievable happens. One of the monkeys comes down, slaps the kid in the face, takes the hat, goes up the tree, and shouts at the kid, "You think you're the only one who had a grandfather who told stories?" Like, it's this ridiculous like story I'm sharing, but the whole concept of it is a sort of continuity of a pattern or meme or a certain archetype that is useful for the civilization. And eventually we cannot avoid global integration. It will happen digitally. And I personally incline towards a sort of network of self-awareness constantly updating the community. I don't know how to build this. I don't know how we can make such a social system where human beings realize that in their kindness and compassion, even beyond the Buddhic level, beyond an identity level sort of compassion, you know, they will create atmospheres for genius to come forth. Because let me tell you, miracles are kind of like angels who are waiting behind clouds until the right moment to step out. And I'm being kind of like, in a Victorian way, poetic. But for me, I thought I knew. Then I saw the unknown, and I realized I didn't know anything. As I was reminded by my mortality that any idea I have of myself is temporary, I just was naturally drawn towards an eternal presence. Like if somebody looks at me, is like, "Do you feel like you're a soul right now?" I'll be like, "You can call it that if the soul has nothing to do with any idea ever." And then the person kind of like stares at you and it's like, "This is pretty much the end of the conversation." Which I'm going to share one last story, which will perhaps contribute to the attempt of a civilization to reach eternity. The story is about these three friends, these three close friends. They're walking by and they suddenly find themselves beside this mysterious huge wall, and they're just kind of walking by it, you know. And, this wall they've never seen. Suddenly they see this huge wall and they're walking by it again. And what happens in the story is that suddenly they see a ladder, like this long ladder above the wall, and they're all just stopped by the ladder and they kind of look at it. It's kind of one of those old stories, so you got to think about it in ancient times or something, in that era, in that way of perception, in that way of perception. And the three friends look at the ladder, and one of them is just curious and interested and feels kind of he's pulled to it. You know, he goes on the ladder and goes to the top. The two friends are just waiting to see for the third friend to go see what's there and come down. They see the third friend go up the ladder and just stand there. And the friend sees the Garden of Paradise. As the story goes, the person just gets a glimpse of heaven. He sees he's found the entrance to heaven, to an absolute sort of perfect state of being. And so this guy jumps in. He jumps into the Garden of Paradise without saying anything. His friends are like, "Whoa, did he just jump in?" And so one of the friends just quickly runs up to check it out. One of the braver friends. Let's say for now. Actually, let's not say braver. One of the friends just runs up to check. The friend runs up to check, and he suddenly sees, oh my God, he sees that other friend just running around in the Garden of Paradise in supreme bliss. Such beyond, the petals of Satchitananda, Jai Satchitananda. And so the second friend looks at that and he just like, he's about to jump in like the first friend, and he just suddenly feels this inner voice. He feels this inner voice that he can't just let go. There's the third friend waiting. He looks at the third friend and he says, "Bro, the entrance to the Garden of Paradise is on the other side of this wall. I'm going. I'm just letting you know." And the dude just jumps into the Garden of Paradise and attains that supreme state of bliss, beyond the dreams of nirvana. The third friend now is just having this very feeling, this very strange feeling, like what's going on. He goes up the ladder. And he's like, what do they mean, Garden of Paradise? He goes up in there and he sees it. He sees that ultimate supreme state. That means he kind of, by seeing the Garden of Paradise, your mind's already being there, you know? So what that means is this guy sees the Garden of Paradise and he looks at his two friends who are in this supreme bliss. And a part of him wants to jump to enter, but he suddenly gets a smile, a different smile. And he's like, oh my God, the Garden of Paradise is here. The whole world must know. And he runs back. He runs back into, you know, the more kind of, let us say, materialistically sophisticated levels of existence. Because the person has found a better way to be, the person can never die because they exist in that first reality. That is the power of eternal vision. Beyond the eyes of mortal men. An eternal universe watches its creation remember its source. As Swami Satchidananda said, religion is God remembering himself. That's a very, very big and very bold statement. It means you are never your thoughts. In every moment of your life, the most ultimate conceivable greatness is accessible now, because where else could it be? You receive life as the moment. So in the moment, may greatness already be. You see, it is as if, again, that Zen saying, if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. If we want to make the eternal dreams of our civilization and of mankind we must aim not just beyond the clouds. We must aim beyond our thoughts. And the inner realms of the being are worth exploring, but not through a sort of chasing, a thirsty chase for belief. Because you'll go into boredom, and you'll suddenly be open to chaos, and then you'll kind of devalue your order, and when you devalue your order, you'll constantly want it back, and because you'll constantly want order back, you'll kind of chain yourself in this mentality where you always feel you don't have it, and you become kind of stuck in your past. You become stuck in your past by realizing that if you have an opinion on who you are now, the opinion is coming from the past. You have in some sense kept it there. So what is beyond this? What is the calling of the beyond in the eyes of a temporary being that feels that the only ladder it can climb is towards the eternal, towards a greater continuity? As if we mess up living on the surface of the planet, we will, in some sense, like the movie Elysium, begin living in our orbit. And if we mess up living in our orbit, we will move and we will try to go somewhere else. But we will see it as that it is the greatest vision that will guide us, and the greatest vision, no great vision can walk alone, because if it does, it is not in the right world, it is in an empty world. It is like, this is why cults occur when an idea tries to make itself um, untouchable by change. A fixed belief is like a denial of entrance into the opposite. You see, I find the only freedom of mind can come through a realization of your true nature. So pretty much if 8 billion beings just calm down, abide by their true nature, and realize that the greatest contribution to humanity is to try to get the greatest ideas out of all these 8 billion people to, in some sense, the main table where big decisions are being made. So pretty much I don't want people to waste time, just like in their rooms and houses the most of their life. I want every human being to kind of, if they have a sort of ability to have a solution or to a problem, they can instantly share it with the world. We want to create a sort of whirlpool of solutions to problems on a global scale, you know, this immense network. So pretty much, in order to have a successful attempt of our civilization to transcend to eternal heights, we must be willing to care for the civilization. We must be willing to care for ourselves as a member of the civilization. And we must be willing to realize that in every human being's life, if they are honest for a while, their true calling and in quotations, mission in life will kind of call to them. When you're sincere, your intuition suddenly, like your phone gets signal because you've come out of the basement of the ego. Plato said, time is the moving image of eternity. Mr.Within would say, eternity is non-existence is zero. Thrown infinitely. At an intelligent but void truth. So pretty much what I'm telling you is God is the unknown, but the unknown is moving knowledge. And when we kind of self-reflect, we kind of get a sense of how, as a living being on this planet, our intelligence occurs. Because you are only shy and you're only careless and ignorant when you are ignorant of your true self, your real self. This is where all those people who ever saw, like, a samurai and were like, wow, that is a level of interesting honor to attain. Let me tell you how you attain honor. You attain honor through, in some sense, a sort of confronting through your honest self certain battles. These battles are different confrontations, as if like you're in a moment somewhere, you're in some situation, and you have a way of kind of like thinking that you're ultimately correct and try to kind of be like a sort of kind of respond, like you try to give the loudest response there, try to use force to push force back, you know, or in that moment, you can in some sense realize that your decisions are coming from your view, and your view in some sense abides through a sort of self-awareness where you care about yourself. So to be able to distinguish unnecessary trouble is a way of never kind of hitting that trouble. Because honestly nowadays I find like mysticism that lacks a sort of devotion to how the moment is present is a kind of blind mysticism. This is why time travel could be a blind mysticism, but if the concept has a sort of sincere value to the species, perhaps the planet shall let that memory kind of be remembered. I hope this talk has served you. A clarity beyond demise is a moment beyond lies. Much blessings and awesome.